Thank you for joining us for the evolution of equity, how a K-8 multi-age program supporting deaf and hard of hearing students was redesigned to support social, emotional, and character development for all. Before we get started, we wanted to take a moment to introduce ourselves. So if we want to go to the next slide.
Hello, I'm Tane Wilton. I am the design and construction manager for Edmond School District, and I was the project manager on this project.
Hi there, I'm Katie Monroe. I teach primary grades for second and third at Madrona, which is in the Edmond School District.
Hi, I'm Emily Everett. I am an architect with Malum Architects, deeply involved in the Madrona school process.
And hello, I'm Corey Rosen, also with Malum Architects. And one of the most exciting things about the four of us is that we have been on the project since the very beginning and continue to learn from Madrona. And so we are excited to also bring different perspectives to the conversation with you today. So, a quick overview on our conversation. So, we'll start out with Tane sharing a bit about the district's mission and vision and how Madrona came to be a project. Katie will share some of the most significant unique aspects of Madrona K-8 and how that drove the development of the design. Tane will highlight some of a bit about the existing school and how it really did little to support the educational program and the social, emotional, and character development, so much a part of the culture of Madrona. And then we'll touch on some key engagement opportunities that shaped the project goals, but really spend the majority of our time digging into how the design goals were explored and how Madrona as a place where student differences are celebrated, respected, and intentionally addressed through design. So through a process of designing for all, Madrona's new home has realized a more acoustic, physical, and inclusive community in which all students feel accepted and connected, and really taking you through some of the outcomes, both pre-COVID, when the school occupied it, and also during COVID. So we continue to learn.
So, Edmond School District missions and visions for, well, any school really is to advocate for all students. And we have in our motto, you can see it says each student learning every day. And that has since evolved into all means all. And it really does mean all. And there was a really beautiful student video put on that it was a tearjerker, just highlighting how all really does mean all. And that means at Madrona, all of our students from preschool, DHH, all the way through 8th grade. And Emily is gonna, I'm sorry, Katie's gonna talk more about that. But we, to start our process, we had an ed spec that we used, a district-wide ed spec, so that could be a launching off point. But we also needed to have a broader vision, a more inclusive vision, and reaching out to our Equity Alliance for Achievement. We embraced their goals and aspirations as part of our process.
So Madrona is a very unique program within the Edmond School District. We are actually a K-8 program. So we house several different programs and levels within the one schoolhouse and one school. We have a 7-8 middle school program that runs right alongside and intermingled with our elementary, which is a kindergarten, and then actually the primary first, second, and third, and intermediate fourth, fifth, and sixth classes. Instead of being single grade classrooms, are multi-age centers. So we have 3 grades in one classroom, along with 2 co-teachers that work together to flexibly group and meet students where they're at. And we have students for 3 years. So it's very unique within the Edmond School District. And we actually are not a neighborhood school, which means that we pull students from all across our district. So we have quite a variety of students and many different programs, one of which is our deaf and hard of hearing program, um, which not only pulls students from across the district, but from many districts in the surrounding area. Um, so it really, within the DHH program, actually, let's go back really quick. We have some classrooms that are self-contained, and then we also have students who are integrated into the gen ed setting. So it sounds like we really have a lot of programs and a lot of chaos going on within this one schoolhouse. But really, it's done very intentionally, because we're really designed to create a community where we collaborate and learn from each other, which gets at our school motto around the tree there, which is awakening minds, nourishing hearts, and cultivating community. So relationships and differentiation are really at the heart of what we do. Our multi-age model allows for more time for teachers to build those relationships with students, and also for students to develop kind of a symbiotic mentorship relationship as well. And then, of course, with that variety of learning needs within one space, it really makes it necessary for us to group students flexibly throughout the day in order to differentiate that learning effectively. What do we have? Oh, here we go.
So Madrona School has been a program within the Edmond School District for more than 17 years. And it had been shuffled around the district for easily 15 before we were able to not only get it on in a bond and then funded, but also get around to actually working on the project. There were other needs that all were vying for attention. And when we finally got to Madrona, I think all the teachers were just so excited to just finally be able to have a voice in what the school should be. It was shoehorned, you might say shoehorned, into a junior high school. On the one hand, it wasn't so shoehorned because it was a junior high. It had metal shops, wood shops, it had science rooms, and none of this really fit a K-8 program. We had rows and rows of lockers. There were, at one time, a very beautiful, you might say, pastoral campus of 6 buildings with courtyards separating them, and really beautiful vistas. The original building had light on 2 sides. You can see in this corridor above the lockers, those were all windows that looked between classrooms to corridors, and there were skylights that went down the corridor. But these were all remodeled at one energy upgrade that closed in all the skylights and tried to address acoustics and closed off those windows. Didn't really solve the problem with the opening and closing lockers and the impact on the acoustics in the classroom. So classrooms then had light on just one side, lots of glare. You can see this exercise here, likes and dislikes. The blues are the likes and the reds are the dislikes. Some other aspects of the site are really that this is a 40-acre site shared with an elementary school, and Madrona uses about 14 acres. And I think our actual buildable space was more like 8 acres. So how the school sat on the site originally was very close to the road. There was a little, very small bus loop. It wasn't separated in a sense that everybody came in, buses and vehicles in the same entry, but then buses shot off to the north. North is up, by the way. And because of the small bus loop, it required a staggered start. Another aspect was the lack of entry. where was the entry with all of these buildings. And really the only way to the entry was right through the parking lot. So this is safe. There was a football field. Well, a K-8 is not a composite middle school. They didn't have football, soccer, some of these other activities. They did have track. They still do. And they also have ultimate frisbee. So for sure, the football space could be used for that, but it was really underutilized for a K-8 program. There were also outdoor corridors between the classrooms, and you'll see that that's in blue. That was an aspect that the students loved. It gave them time to reset, breathe, and reflect as they went from class to class. So Katie showed you the motto of Madrona, and that was really our jumping off point. And to then gather the information and that inquiry, we needed to create a really robust set of committees because there is no multi-age public school in the region. I mean, there's on a typical project, you have other elementary schools you can tour, other middle schools, and you can glean ideas and learn the next and best learning environment planning. But we didn't have that for Madrona. So we really had to do a deep dive and investigate ourselves. And so to do that, we created a variety of committees. The design review committee was really tasked with what does the program need? And from there, we had visionaries, and the visionary committee were those who had been with Madrona all along. One was even had been a student at Madrona and then is now a teacher at Madrona. So this was extra special. So the visionaries really kept the design review committee on task to meet the ethos of Madrona. We had staff and students user group input, focus group input, where we really dived into what are the furniture, fixtures, equipment, what are the teaching aids needed to actually deliver the space to perform for the Madrona program. And then even broader out beyond that in green, you see the school community, the neighboring community, the greater Edmond School District community. And this also included our each outreach that you saw at the beginning slide and that equity and inclusive community. All of this was then on the outside here, you see the decision makers. So we gathered this input from everybody, but then the ultimate decision makers and the direction came from the steering committee, then back to the design team.
And so in order to have that robust experience, as Tane described, we created a series of activities to work with the different groups. And so one of those is shown here. We call them spectrums. And so after kind of listening, just a whole lot of listening and lots of questions, we start to understand some of the points of tension for a community. So that spectrum allows us to understand the nuances between two viable but divergent options. And so we recognize that most issues are not either or, and the spectrum allows individuals to sort of feel out where they stand on an issue and communicate that then to the larger group. And so what you see here is those two kind of divergent options on the end. And then we asked the different members of the teams to add a dot for where they are. And so we use this to look at the organization of the campus, the organization of the centers, and Madrona values. And so a couple things as an example to highlight is indoor circulation and covered outdoor circulation. And most of our schools, there's very little question as to that, but um, thinking about what we heard from the students, as Tane described, that ability to sort of reset and have fresh air, you can see that density of dots at that covered outdoor circulation. And then similarly, the green space, with it being an option school, that can drive a tremendous amount of space for parking. However, working with the different teams, we really understood that goal to prioritize the green space. And we used a similar exercise to get at this question of what should the heart of campus be? If you want to go to the next. So we started with what we thought we had been hearing, right? The Learning Center, which is so unique at Madrona, the Commons as this place for community gathering, and then the library as well. Many folks, as we observed and visited this school, there was a lot of importance there and oftentimes on other K-12 projects. But at the meeting, at our design review committee meeting, a student said, well, what if I don't think any of those should really be the heart? And he said, okay, well, tell us what it should be. And the student walked up to the board and added outdoor learning. If you go to the next slide, Emily. Um, and you can see, right, a lot of the participants really gravitated toward this as a theme and really became central to the design concept. Again, thinking about why outdoor spaces are so desirable, that ability to stimulate the mind and that multi-sensory experience, and kind of allowing students a moment to reflect and take a break as they move to the next activity or class.
We also engaged the students of Madrona while we were in our pre-design and design process. We actually sat down with 16 Madrona students at one point and rolled out a bunch of butcher paper and asked the students to tell us what outdoor learning and outdoor play looked like. And the theme that came up most was that everything was drawn in and among the trees. So as you can see, even one of these students actually lined the paper with trees, which is really indicative of the Madrona surrounding itself. And a mountain bike park, tree houses, all nature play, so rocks, benches, logs were all included in this exploration. A second activity we actually engaged the students with is we gave these same 16 students disposable cameras and asked them, where do you feel you are most inspired to learn? And sent them away with their camera for about a month. And when we collected all of the images at the end, what we found is that 85% of those photos actually came back as outdoor spaces, whether that was at Madrona or at home of beautiful plants and wildlife, all with very different perspectives. As you can see, the bottom image, right across the monkey bars, or with just gorgeous light looking down, looking up. But as you can see, greenery is very prevalent.
So throughout the educational specifications process, the design team engaged those different groups, as Tane had shared in the hourglass, as we like to call it, and really many consistent themes, and very much aligned with, as Katie shared, kind of the culture and values of Madrona. So multi-age integration, flexibility, the awareness and commitment to accommodate diverse people and needs. Positive social interactions, acoustics, primary, healthy and natural, filled with natural light, and indoor and outdoor connections. And so from a long list and lots of those 5x7 cards, we sort of identified or prioritization around 5 goals. And so address the whole child is really about an environment that supports social, emotional, and character learning, spaces that emphasize the importance of individual reflection, that interpersonal communication, those relationships, right, as Katie described, self-awareness and related safety. And then thinking about flexibility for the future, an environment that must evolve responsibly to meet students' needs today, then, when we were talking in 2015, and in the future. And even in our current world, right? How does Madrona respond to COVID and what that brings for learning? Appropriate acoustics, an environment that responds to the specific acoustic needs of the spaces, whether it's dampening or clarity, and contributes to those positive qualities of learning environments, and the gathering spaces as well. A beautiful natural school. I think, as Emily shared some of the what we heard with the students, but really that it nourishes the whole person, and respects the environment. Um, it is nestled in a beautiful site. I wish we could take you all there, but also a respect for efficient and responsible use of natural materials and resources, and making that visible to the students. There is a tremendous value on nature within the Madrona community. Um, and then flex or supporting adult learning. So thinking about how the spaces not only support the students, but the ongoing professional development of staff and parents and the community, to keep that adult learning alive and promote communication, reflection, collaboration, and planning. So, starting with Address the Whole Child, Madrona is a community of individuals who celebrate the growth and unfolding of each member. And really, as Katie shared, Madrona values the relationships in which individuals are revealed, and in turn, the development enriches the community as a whole. And so, with that focus on the whole child, emphasis is really placed on the character development and social skills in balance with the academic pursuits. And one of the things that I really appreciated working with the educators at Madrona was the reminder that it's just as important what kind of people children become as it is how much they know.
So one of the questions that we presented back to the design review committee is, what does it mean? What is the best way that students actually are able to learn? And that is the individual, whether they're thinking, collaborating, imparting, discovering. If they're in each of those scenarios, what kinds of group sizes really are best for that kind of learning? And we were also given the brief, right, of the learning center being 54 students right from the start. But really asking the question, do you always learn in that 54 student size model? And what we ended up finding is that the design review committee outlined that actually 70% of the time, students were going to be learning best in smaller size groups. And that's age specific too. We were asking if the age also matters, or whether the discipline, so whether it's in science or actually just in a standard learning center. But 70% overall would actually require a smaller group size. And after that exercise, actually, we received this drawing from Katie as she was trying to visualize what that meant for the Learning Center. So Katie, would you actually take a moment to give us a little insight as to what you were thinking here?
Yeah, it's been such a long time since I've seen this. Yeah, really, this was just me playing around as part of the process and thinking through what spaces do I need as a primary teacher, who also has deaf and hard of hearing students and a variety of learning needs. So really it came down to my teaching partner and I need a whole class meeting area where we can do community building, and kind of foster that multi-age partnerships and collaboration, as well as then have smaller areas where we could split our group for differentiation, and to address specific learning needs and developmental needs. You can see from the get-go, I too was on board with that outdoor connection, just right there as part of the learning space where we could continue learning beyond the walls of our classroom. and just lots of storage and access for kids to be able to get materials independently, as they work very flexibly, within our space. So there was a lot that went into this, and as I'm kind of looking around, I'm just having all those memories come back.
Well, we actually took that and ran with it so that it wasn't just Katie's mind involved in designing the One Learning Center, but we actually brought this back to ask the question to the design review committee. We broke out all of these spaces that we had heard were necessary in order to have the proper learning center environment, and given square footage of 2,400 square feet, we brought all of these pieces to the design review committee and asked, what are the parts of the learning center that are needed in everyday learning? And we also asked that based on age appropriateness as well. So Katie, these, we ended up with the images on the left being the results, but would you be able to kind of describe the process of this? Because I know we provided you guys also this block model with small little furniture, movable walls, to be able to visualize what these individual groups could look like in a space.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember during this process, lots of conversation about different learning situations. And we had people there from, lots of different programs and levels. Um, and there was things like, oh, well, in this situation, I need to have kids in this small group, or I really need students to be able to collaborate on this project together, or I need to do this event in my classroom that we always do, and we need larger space for that. Lots of talk about developmental needs of students and accessibility, which is important in our community. So we played around with some retractable walls there, and permanent walls, um, and really kind of created some of those small and large spaces. So it really sort of all came down to, we really needed flexible spaces that allowed for a variety of groups of different sizes throughout our learning day. Um, and it also kind of then evolved that depending on the program or the level, that there would be different needs, and it wouldn't just be kind of a one size fits all.
Yeah, there was also the need for circulation, and there were a number of centers that had really pushed the boundaries. One of them particular in the wood shop, and they had what they called the blue alley. And the blue alley was really that space that you could circulate around without impacting the little smaller breakout groups. And so as we get into the design, you'll see how some of these uh, sort of, I guess you would say, uh, vernacular sort of design ended up becoming incorporated in the design.
So Katie, those diagrams then directly translated to these spaces for each of the learning centers. So would you quickly highlight maybe a few of the things, especially about the primary intermediate learning center?
Yeah, absolutely. That one in the middle is the classroom I currently teach in. Um, and you'll notice that it has that retractable wall. And so it's all kind of folded up there in the middle of that island, that counter or table space in the back of the room there. And it allows us to have a larger space when we have whole group activities. And it also allows us to create a sound and visual barrier there, so that my teaching partner and I can separate groups by learning need and differentiate that way. We also have those small group areas. I like to call it the green nook because there's lots of green paneling. And it really is kind of a quieter space where I can pull a small group and work with them while there are other things going on in the room. I also remember lots of talk about storage. We have 3 grades in a multi-age center, which means that we rotate our curriculum often on a 3-year basis. And so I was so excited to get much more storage in that cabinet space than I did have before.
And then the kindergarten and primary, intermediate, DHH, and middle school rooms did have a little bit of a tweak on it, where small groups were requested to actually be more enclosed. So that is what you see on both of the left and the right images.
Yeah, and during our functional programming, we heard that there was a need, as you saw, 70% for smaller group learning. There was also that need for the large group learning. And we also saw the need for outdoor learning. So we really had the opportunity to marry up these concepts. And so you'll see in the slides coming up that while the interior has the small group, we have the large group learning on the exterior, just adjacent to that classroom.
So I had mentioned kind of before that retractable wall being kind of a sound barrier. Acoustics as well as lighting, kind of thinking about all those different senses, really were some big conversations that we had. And it keeps coming up again and again as a major issue. Our old building was very noisy and echoey, had lots of metal, and as Tane had said, it was originally designed as a junior high back in the 60s. So when we have a pretty mobile, flexible student community and program, it really did create a lot of noise. Even just down to the HVAC system, where I'm constantly competing to be heard and to limit student distraction, both visually and auditorily. So this is actually my current classroom, this picture here, with my wonderful students. And this is in our whole class space. And we have a much easier time being heard, as well as respecting the hearing needs of my deaf or hard of hearing students, and the visual needs when they're using an ASL interpreter. The materials that were considered for this project really have made a huge difference. We have that retractable wall, which cuts down quite a bit of sound when we're running 2 separate groups. Everything just down to some of the paneling, I feel like has made a big difference. I know maybe Tane can speak more to the ceiling height too, I know was a consideration. And then just visually as well, it really is a very calm, neutral space. And we can just sort of create all these little flexible groups. I'll let Tane speak a little bit more here to some of the thought that went into the acoustics.
Right, and so along those lines, we have in-floor heating. So that is very quiet. There's displacement ventilation. This is also a wellness component where we're bringing in fresh air, and it's very quiet and slow moving air. It's 1 degree cooler than the ambient temperature, and then that hits a person, warms up, and goes up and out. And so we're not recirculating and with stagnant layers of air like you might have in an older style school. This air is all very fresh and clean. And so that's one thing that's even helped in this pandemic. Students sitting on the floor, you'll see that the ability to have clarity when signing. So the interpreters doing the sign language, they need a neutral background. And we found that the green is going to be the best to offset any hand motion. And then also just the calming neutral wall color, so that the art is what makes the space and the building sort of takes a step back and isn't the loud part of the building. So it just reduces clutter and noise, visual noise.
And Tane, I'll add into the natural lighting that we have is fantastic. You can see those beautiful skylights there. And, we also have a really nice amount of light coming in from our walls that are glass. But I have to tell you that sometimes I forget to turn on the lights. I don't even notice. We just have this great amount of natural light that feels really good, not to always kind of be relying on that fluorescent light, that harsh fluorescent light.
I will just add, though, that while we had fluorescent lights in the old school, we now have LEDs. We didn't, I think this school was at the age where tunable lights were only just starting. And maybe now we would have figured out a way to get tunable lights in the program, but at this time when this school came out, it wasn't really an option for us.
So Katie, here, I think we have a couple of slides showing the difference between a divided and a open learning center. So again, this is your space, is that correct?
That's my teaching partner. I'm on the other side in my striped sweater over there. Again, these are my wonderful students. So you can see we go from kind of meeting in a whole group, which I think we'll see a little bit more of in a moment, to kind of these more differentiated learning groups. Students are able to help us quickly adjust the furniture. That was also a big consideration in making sure that we could run the various groups that we need to. So we can go from a whole group space to closing this dividing wall, and moving those tables that have lockable wheels on them, adjusting chairs, and it's a fairly quick process. And you can see my students are fairly little and they are able to help out. They know what to do. They love taking the responsibility for that. That's kind of a big thing that we do too, is kind of make kids a part of the process. And we can just quickly get into a different size group. So there's our whole group. Notice that when we meet in a whole group, we're often in a big circle like this, which is more deaf friendly. That's our ASL interpreter in the middle, supporting some of my students. So this is really where we're able to do a lot of our community building. And it's really important that we have the space to create this large circle and this large gathering area. So being able to adjust not only the classroom, but the furniture within it really allows us to run our program the way that we need to run it.
The operable wall, I would add, has maybe if you step back one slide, you can see that the bottom is a translucent film that was added, and that was really to reduce visual distractions when students are actually sitting at a table. We wanted the students to be able to focus on their work and not be distracted by those on the other side of the panel. And also you'll see in the plan that the operable wall doesn't close off completely. So it is always open around the backside. And this was done on purpose. So we wanted students to have that agency to be able to get up and go to the bathroom or wash their paintbrush or wash their hands or get a drink of water, whatever they needed. And so there's not a door that you would have to open to get in, other than, I guess there is a door to the restroom facilities, but that opening is always there. And we did test that acoustics by going to Alderwood Middle School and testing their operable wall that separates the library and the commons. And even with the door part way open, it still canceled out enough of the commons, the noise from the commons, that library could still function. So this was all part of that inquiry process.
Yeah. And Tane, if I can add in really quick too, not only logistically, but just kind of part of our philosophy, my teaching partner and I don't see ourselves as two separate classes ever, and so being able to go to the other side, as we call it, um, to get materials that are needed, or, to just take care of business that students need to do, because it's all one classroom, that their access is not blocked, and it doesn't feel like we're two separate entities. It really feels like there is flow, and we are one community and one learning center.
Correct. And that is also the case when you zoom out a little bit further beyond just one learning center. And we'll go to the next slide. You'll see the restrooms that separate the two, but it's also a connection to the next learning center. And so this allows even greater collaboration between the teachers and the students, because they're able to just pass from one learning center to the next internally as well. So we, during our during our pre-design process, we found the need for, at the time, what we called non-gender toilets. And we didn't know too much about it. We checked our board policy, and of course there was policy around this, how to be equitable and inclusive, but we didn't have so many, we had 0 schools that had been designed around this need. And so we set about gathering everybody we could bring in to be part of this inquiry. And we called it the Toilet Summit. And from the highest level of our district leadership all the way down to 6th graders were included in this conversation. And what we found is that there's a need for toilets. It's a human need. Has nothing to do with gender. And the students called us out on that. And we'll see later on, we'll bring this up again. But here specifically, this sort of shared space between the learning centers really functions as meeting that toilet need, meeting that hand washing need, storage, access between spaces, visibility into the space for soft supervision. And one thing, we have more toilets than the code requires. And that was really just to limit any kind of lines that you might have when maybe so many students want to use the facilities at the same time.
Katie, you've talked about how important it is to the educational and the learning environment. Anything you would add?
Yeah. I have 2 thoughts. Just Tane mentioned, looking at not having a specific gender label on a toilet, a basic human need. Our community wants to make sure that we're supporting all of our students, and that they don't have to consider their gender identity just to use a toilet. Um, I think in supporting all students learning, we need to make sure that they're supported socially and emotionally. And it just takes away any question or stress about it. It's really just a non-issue. Students don't think about it, don't ask about it. It's just a toilet. Also, just from a behavior management position, I can, see into that central sink room. And instead of students, like they maybe would in the past, kind of going down the hall to a bathroom where I don't know who's in there, I don't know what they're doing in there, if they're wasting time playing in the sink, if they're having some social conflicts that I can't be there to support. It's just not happening, because I can see what's going on. I can pop in and say, looks like you're done washing your hands. Let's get back to learning. It just sort of deflates a lot of the bathroom issues that would occur at a typical school, and what our experience was before.
As we've hit on it a couple of times so far, the Learning Center, though, extends past those glass walls. And Katie, would you be able to talk about how maybe how it was designed, and then maybe how you're using it now, but how the Learning Center on the interior really does extend into the outdoor exploration porches?
Absolutely. This is right outside our classroom doors. And because our walls are made of glass, we can see exactly what's going on out there. And it doesn't feel like it's outside the classroom necessarily. It feels like it's just another learning space that we use. You can see in the pictures a variety of students of different grade levels and different needs using this space in very different ways. We have students who go out there because they need some independent workspace that's really just sort of a calmer space for them. We have events that we do out there and just sort of expand outside the classroom, straight into our natural environment. We have teachers that teach lessons out there. Really, there are just a lot of those neurological benefits to that connection with nature, and just a change in scenery sometimes can really stimulate anything from creativity to just cementing concepts as you kind of just look somewhere else for a moment. So it just really feels like part of our classroom, and it brings that value that our community was expressing, that they really want to feel like they are just a part of the nature and we can go learn anywhere. During this COVID time, as I've been kind of teaching a little bit more hybrid in person, we've used that space so much. Kids can space out there and have a quick snack, or just get some fresh air. It feels nice to be out there, and teachers and students alike have just really benefited from that. My colleagues and I, that's where we go eat lunch, because there's not really any space that we can do that in this COVID world. So it's been a lifesaver.
And one thing that's really made all of this possible is the need for all the teaching aids and all the furniture, fixtures, and equipment that you have in a regular classroom that we might think of as being indoors. The outdoor space needs that as well. So we have the larger intercom clocks, we have water, power, all the needs for conducting a science class, or conducting, as you see here, students just celebrating, presenting, all of those aspects, the lighting, all of this is just part of the design.
Yeah.
So
my kids still want to go out even if it's raining sometimes.
Mhm.
They'll sit under the awnings and be perfectly happy out there.
So the Learning Center was what we ended up really focusing on, and the Learning Center is the stepping block to how we actually laid out the overall school on the site. And so on the left, there are a couple of diagrams here that show how we presented the learning centers and distribution of learning centers to the design review committee. And what we heard were two things. The top and the bottom image, where it's more of a circle and everything is inwardly focused, was definitely thought of as a benefit in developing and encouraging the community of Madrona. Whereas the one in the middle, with the circulation kind of going across, being able to meander from one learning center to another, actually would benefit the middle school passing periods, if that circulation bar wouldn't distract from other classrooms. So those three kind of diagrams did set us out to provide the plan that we did, with a couple of 5 different learning center pods, and with a center spine of circulation. So with that, we also kept hearing that the ages, the commingling of ages is again encouraging the community of Madrona, and the happenstance, middle schooler passing by a primary or kindergartner was something that was definitely encouraged and those relationships, building those just in passing was also of importance. So we actually laid out the learning centers, and then the locations of each of the ages were very distributed so that each learning center would see across a learning courtyard to, maybe a different age group. And that extension really was learning from not only the learning center, but from the people surrounding as well. And that is also now shown when we add the layer of circulation and add that layer of transparency. All of these visual connections, actual connections were strengthened across these courtyards in what we called the quilt of learning. And so you can see this in section above where all of the glass is down low and you're kind of held by the ceilings and those awnings, just keeping your eyes low across all of the learning centers. And as you can see in the learning courtyard, everything is pretty visible, open, always can see around the corner, so that if anyone is actually having a conversation and signing, you are able to, if students are not actually able to hear around the corner, they would be able to see around the corner. And that is in contrast to actually the circulation spine, where we have much more solid materials for that middle school passing, as I said. So if middle schoolers go from class to class in the middle of the day, they are not distracting the other learning centers as they go about doing so. The left image here shows the main entry from in the morning, where students are actually encouraged to pass by the front entry and just go in through the the exterior courtyards to the learning centers. So I'll show in plan here at the bottom, the main entry and the morning entry. So we just saw that view of the morning entry, but the learning centers then are beyond, and that the morning entry bypasses that main public block that has the gym and the commons and the library. So students are constantly traveling from their learning center back to the library or to eat lunch during the day.
Which goes back to that, what is the heart of Madrona, right? So we're constantly bringing the community together through those outdoor learnings or outdoor spaces as well.
And if you were to point at the very center, you will see that is the central courtyard. Katie, would you be able to describe a little bit of the interest in positive social relationships and interactions throughout the school?
Absolutely. So this is right inside our main entrance here. And it really has become a community space. Before in our old building, we just had, a hallway that was, as I said, echoey and a small little office. There was no space to just sort of be in there. You had to take care of business and then leave, so you weren't a distraction. Oftentimes, adults and students would have conversations in the hallways that were right outside a classroom door, and it was very distracting. But at the same time, there was a need for this community space, and our community was telling us that. I would say adults, staff members, and families alike can gather here in this space or just sit down for a moment if they have business to take care of, which our active parent community often does. But it's also for our middle school students, because they are middle schoolers and developmentally they need some social spaces that are a little bit more welcoming to them. So this space really allows for that here right inside the entrance.
The location of this was also really intentional. On the other side, headed off to the north of this, is the gym. So you had those kinds of relationships. And then also for more calming, there's the outdoor courtyard and community courtyard where you can take your lunch and go out and eat, or you could just go out and be part of an extension of this space through just the expanse of glass and that visual connection.
Yeah.
And that visual connection between each of the spaces and also the circulation paths was something that we definitely wanted to highlight here too. Katie, would you be able to talk a little bit about how that positive interaction is encouraged through the circulation path and the glass?
Yeah, I would use that word visibility again, right? I don't feel like I'm isolated in my own little classroom space with four walls. Um, I do really feel like it builds those community connections that our community does crave. Um, and you can see what's going on. That learning and business that goes on in our school is really kind of there on display. And, I hear sometimes people say, like, oh, I can't hide. But, um, truly that is ultimately a benefit that everything we're doing, you can kind of feel a part of, and you can kind of get a sneak peek into what's going on in different classrooms or, those different smaller spaces and in the outdoor spaces. So that visibility really kind of helps us build and foster that sense of community. And through that kind of central circulation there too, as you were saying, there is an opportunity to kind of see people as we're going about our day.
That
And
central spine too is also tells the water story. And really what the students find is that they are learning everywhere. And the students understand this water story, where the water is coming off the roofs and going into the rain gardens and are being cleaned. And then that water goes to the wetlands that are adjacent to the school. And the students really pride themselves in knowing this, the sort of environment that their school is within.
Providing that variety of learning spaces and that visual into each of these was something we heard. So this image is showing the library, and actually from the commons. So even in the commons, when some students are eating, they're actually able to see in and see students learning, reading, sitting on the floor in whatever mode they find best for their own learning.
And the same for the students in the library, right? Then connecting maybe with those in the commons, but from a smaller, maybe a nook or a spot for an individual.
Tane, would you be able to describe how the toilets actually ended up at the main bank in a difference comparison to the learning centers?
Right. So we saw in the learning centers, they were just little, 2, 3 toilets grouped together. Now here is the main toilet facility for the entire school. And this is right adjacent to the commons. It's also right adjacent to the gym. So those are some of the largest gathering spaces and where we need the most toilets at any one time. And the neat thing about the way these are grouped is the toilets are around an alternative hallway. So some students even purposely take this as a shortcut to get to music rooms that are further afield and go around the commons instead of through the commons. But really, the toilets are there to foster that individual need, whether it's gender, age, religion. They're accommodating for everybody. So some of the toilets have a sink where you could go in and be able to close the door and have your own individual space. And others, the sink is more just out on display. And what we found during our inquiry process is some of the most bullying that happens in school happens around that sink usage. And so the sinks are right out there, right next to the drinking fountain. So everybody is able to use this space. And here again, what is on the other side of the door? A toilet. And that's what the signage is about.
To continue the positive interactions conversation, Katie, would you be able to explain what's happening in this photo too, and kind of bring it back to the fact that we did ask parents early on in engagement, when the school opens, what do you want the newspaper headline to say?
yeah, you can see that headline right there. Madrona puts on a grand opening outdoor concert. I think, we've talked about how those outdoor spaces really allow us to extend the learning environment outside the walls of the classroom. And this is just on a larger scale, that same thing. Um, Instead of, confining this sort of event to maybe like a gym like we would have before, we're here in the heart of our school, and we are on display, and everyone is a part of it, including our families and community, which was, at every level, just really something that we valued. So you can see that here on the grand scale as well. It really is at every level. We are just out in nature as well as in the learning environment.
So the permeable nature of the original school, if you can remember back with those 6 buildings and the courtyards that they had, we really needed a way for the teachers to be comfortable sending their students into that outdoor study space unattended by a teacher. And so how could we do that? And we thought about the way what you might say a normal school functions, where the entire school is in a building. And so the red line that you see around the image of the school is what we consider the outside. Those are the outer walls of the school. And yet these walls are transparent. They're short, they're not imposing, but they do contain the students and keep anybody that uses our 40 acres from then walking into our learning spaces, which is what you would expect in a regular school. You don't expect the community to just walk through the school at any time. And so that's really what these walls were able to do. I also wanted to just quickly let you know about some of the other aspects of the site. You can see the bus loop is a very long loop, and it's separate from the parent uh, vehicles. And it's really a long loop, and primarily because now we have one bus drop-off time period. And so that has really helped the school become an integrated school like they had said they wanted to become. The parent vehicle loop is also really long, and this also has saved the community from the impact of cars stacking up and blocking traffic. So now the bulk of the traffic fits within the loop, and the loop flows way smoother. Something else you'll see is the football field has been converted into hard surface play, into covered play, into a small little soccer field, a more intimate space. And the larger ultimate frisbee soccer spaces are out closer to the road, and also for ease of community use.
So you've seen so many of these photos showcasing what we consider a beautiful natural school here, but nestled in the trees. All of the materials we wanted to keep as neutral as possible. And I know Katie has mentioned the biophilic impacts to learning. So all of keeping nature involved as much as possible, and nature analogs, just visual connection to nature really does calm the mind and could potentially get students ready for learning all the time. So that is what we are trying to do, put nature on display with each of the schools, each of the pods. And you can see the rain garden, as Tane had mentioned, on the right, with some of the scuppers directing water off the roofs and into the rain garden, going to the wetland after all. And then some of the other central courtyard spaces on the left. Inside Madrona, we also asked students to help us in providing some pride graphics. And the first of those is this Madrona leaf mural at the end of the entry hallway. And we asked students each to draw their own leaves, color them, cut them out, and then we arranged them to show Madrona beyond. And this, as a community activity, really shows, one leaf cannot create Madrona, but all of them together can be arranged so that they can. A second graphic that we were able to put together actually enlisted the students to use the 5 character words that are permeated in their everyday learning. And they each hand wrote either responsibility, kindness, empathy, perseverance, or respect. And these were etched on wood panels around the Madrona tree. So Katie, can you quickly tell us a little bit about how this does permeate in the learning environment every day?
Absolutely. These are character traits that are taught explicitly, but they're also practiced and discussed constantly throughout our year and throughout our day in, a variety of ways. Character education has always been something that has been a core tenet of our program. And what I love here is that as you walk in, it shows that character ed is not only at the heart of our program, but now it's etched in the very walls of our building. I also love the tree and the leaves. Not only here are we bringing the learning out into nature and extending the classroom, but here we're bringing nature into the building inside.
So as we think back to the educational specifications, and what we asked was what makes an ideal learning environment, Madrona challenged us to create a design that embraces outdoor learning and cultivates a culture of community and sharing. And we hope that comes through, right, as we talked, Katie shared, being deaf friendly and how coming together in a circle was critical to that, but that builds community connections for all students and educators. Similarly, the deep overhang, yes, it creates the width so that people can be walking side by side and communicating with one another, but at the same time creates those quiet spaces that can be used for outdoor learning directly adjacent. The toilets, maybe initially was started from a conversation around supporting transgender students, but really addresses people with disabilities, any individual requiring assistance, parents with children, faith considerations, and just the need for privacy. So, this reoccurring themes. What is it to be inspirational? What is it to be connected to the outdoors? What is peaceful and what is welcomed all? As we reflect and to close, we wanted to ask Tane and Katie, what makes Madrona equitable to all?
For me, the way Madrona sits on the site now, as opposed to how it was originally, the way it is now is so peaceful and calming. It brings the student in along a single path, and there's clarity and visibility, and there's just not, I guess it's just open and airy, and it is very welcoming. There's no confusion. You just know, here I am on the path, and there it goes. And it meanders, and there's interests and vistas along the way. But all students entering the site end up at the front door, and you saw the images of the alternative route through the secure perimeter. And to me, that just calming, welcoming sets the student up for success for the day.
Yeah. I'll say 2 things. I'll say that the variety of spaces and learning experiences that we're able to provide means that everyone truly does have a place here. When I asked my colleagues what they liked most about our building, they talked about that connection to nature almost exclusively. Every one of them had mentioned it. It truly is, as you can see here, just sort of a part of the landscape. We're just a part of where we are. I think there truly is a quiet, still beauty to the campus that really does awaken the mind and nourish the heart and cultivate community. And that's who we are.
Thank you, Katie, Tane, and Emily.